Well, hi retro computing fans, it's Wrangler here again with another video, and as you can see, just brushing up on my gaming skills and playing a little bit of Xenon 2. Not very well, I hasten to add, it's been a while. Let me just pause that for a second. Why am I showing you this? Well, you might be thinking, all very interesting, but we've seen Xenon 2 a million times, but let me just pan down for a minute. Xenon 2 here, not running on the A3000 here. You can see the activity lights are all off, no power light on. No, this is Xenon 2 running on this machine, which is a Sharp X68000. So in this video I'm just going to be looking at what the Sharp X68000 has to offer, and actually, is it better than an Amiga? That's what I'll be looking into in this video. But just to kick us off, let me turn all this off, unplug all the wires on the X68000 and walk you around that machine so I can show you what it's like. Okay, so here she is, we're turned off and everything unplugged, so let me just walk you around the machine. I mean, just before I start, you might be a little bit like me. I think I must have been under a rock for the last 30 years or something, because it's only pretty recently I've actually even heard of an X68000, let alone owned one. And the reason for that is that Sharp produced these machines for the Japanese market and didn't sell them anywhere outside of Japan. So they are pretty unusual elsewhere in the world and difficult to get hold of. But what we're going to do is have a look at what this machine is capable of in a bit more detail in a minute. It was released, by the way, at around the same time as the Amiga, first coming out in 1987 and then successively being upgraded. What you've got in front of you here is the Super HD version that came out in June 1990, but except for the later versions, they are pretty similar in spec, with only some relatively minor changes as things went along. First of all, let's look at the case design. I think I've said on previous videos how much I like the A3000 case, by far my favourite look of the Amigas. But let's just look at this X68000 design. You can see sort of two vertical towers connected together here and on a plinth at the bottom. Let me just plan down so you can see that. So it's all one unit, but in this tower design, looking a little bit like a sort of a modern console perhaps, but wow, I just think they have really captured something from a design point of view with this Sharp. You know, incredible. Almost a little bit of a sort of supercomputer look. Is there a bit of a sort of Cray look about it? I don't know. I just think there's something to it. I really, really like the look of this case. It's all hard plastic, but inside a lot of metal shielding. But what else have we got on the front here? Well, let's just pan down and have a little look at the front ports. So we've got some activity lights at the top here. We've got some slots here, and these are 5¼ inch, believe it or not, 5¼ inch floppy drives, pair of them. They have a rather neat feature that they are soft ejecting ones. So you hit the eject button and it pops out, a bit like an old style CD player. So that's pretty cool. I think the X68000, by the way, is packed with cool features, and we'll come to those, some of those in a minute. But let's keep going around the case. We've got a headphone socket at the front. We've got joystick 1 here, more on that in a minute. Centrally placed power button, helpfully coloured in red there. Volume knob. why do we need volume knob? Well, because it's got a built-in speaker, so if you're without any other speakers you can control the system volume from here. It's a little bit tinny as a speaker, but at least it's got one in case you're stuck without it. We've got a keyboard port, a mouse port, more on those in a minute. Let's just have a look around the back. And what have we got here? Well, let's start on the left side. So we've got a couple of slots, and I'm missing one of the slot panels here. So we can add some more memory. This particular machine's got 2 megabytes of RAM in it as standard, but I can add more with the slots. And perhaps that I need to do that at some point because some of the games need 4 megs of RAM. We've got a remote socket, must confess don't know too much about that. Printer, FG, whatever that means, stereoscopic port, I guess for some kind of stereoscopic goggles, you know, 3D stuff. TV control, would you believe it? Image in, analog out, RGB out. So this is our monitor port. So immediately we're beginning to see that this is different to normal kind of VGA port. And then again, you know, the Amiga had its own kind of custom output for video. So what you find if you're using one of these Sharps today is you end up with loads of these kinds of things, adapters to have the Sharp output at one end and VGA at the other end. And I think this kind of style of connector was actually commonly used in Japanese computers. So this is not a Sharp thing, it's more of a sort of Japanese thing. We've got a serial port right at the bottom here, audio in and out, so that's where I can connect my speakers to, and joystick 2. Slightly odd design in this respect, to me at any rate, is the second joystick port's around the back. I guess if it had been me, I'd have put joystick 2 at the front and put the keyboard and mouse around the back, but hey ho, it is what it is. We've got a floppy disk expansion port there and SCSI port. This was the first Sharp X68000 to have internal SCSI. Before that, versions had something called SASI, which was the forerunner to SCSI, but this was a fully SCSI machine. In here there's no longer a SCSI hard drive. It's one of those solid state sort of SCSI to SD cards, much less power and low maintenance. And in this area is where the PSU would normally be. Actually, PSU seem to have a habit on the X68000 of giving up quite easily, so it's been modded by a previous owner to take out the mains PSU, put in, I think there's a Pico PSU in here, but at any rate powered by a laptop power adapter, so all the main stays out of this case and it's just DC that's going in there. A little bit more convenient in this day and age. But let's just scoot back around the front and talk about the machine a little bit more. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and that's just scroll up a little bit so you can see one of the X68000's little party tricks, which is an integrated carrying handle, which is actually pretty convenient because this baby does weigh quite a lot. It's deceptively heavy, and that is really all the metal shielding that's inside. It's quite a beast, but I guess sturdy with it. I think the other thing to just tell you about is some of the other adapters that you'd need if you're going to get one of these running for yourself. We've talked about the video cable. In terms of the joystick ports, these will take MSX compatible joysticks, or in my case I've got a switchable quick shot, I think it is, So I can set that to joystick mode, put it in here quite happily. When I want to use it on the Amiga, put it on Amiga mode, and so that works very comfortably. The other thing you can use, and need to use for some games, is a gamepad, and what you can do is use a Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis, depending on where you live, one of those keypads, either a 6-button one like I've got here or a 3-button one, but you can't plug it directly into here. You do need an adapter for that, and based on some designs on the internet, I created a little adapter like this, and you can see I've marked it up because it's switchable between a 6-button joypad and a 3-button one. All of this is doing, there's nothing clever inside, it's just rewiring some of the pins so they map across to the right locations. But that lets me use joypads with the X68000. The other thing you need to do before you go very far with the X68000 is hook up a keyboard, because you're going to need to type stuff in, get games going. Although that looks like a PS2 kind of standard keyboard connector, it isn't at all. In fact, I think it's got a different number of pins. So what I've had to do is create this little thing. Again, there are designs for these adapters online, and this just puts in a little sort of microprocessor thing in here to take signals from a regular PS2 keyboard, you know, this kind of thing, in at one end and spit out something that's compatible with X68000 at the other end. So with this contraption, I can happily use a regular PC keyboard with the X68000. There is a limitation though, because of course the keyboards I use will be UK style and therefore have the number of keys for the UK. As I understand it, at least, not proficient in Japanese, but regular Japanese keyboards actually have more keys on them than, for example, European ones do. And that means that there are some keys on Japanese keyboards that don't exist on European keyboards. So kind of that's a little bit of an issue you've got to work around. It doesn't matter really what your capabilities of your adapter are if the key doesn't actually exist on the keyboard you're using. So far that hasn't proved too much of a problem, but it is something to just be thinking about. Okay, well, that's enough blather about what the X68000 looks like. I think what we need to do though is, because this is, you know, a question of is the X68000 better than an Amiga, we ought to look at the stats for these two machines and put them head to head. Now, as I say, the X68000 originally came out in 1987 and was discontinued in the mid-90s. So I think what we've got to do is look at an equivalent Amiga from that era and see how the specs measure up. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's have a look at the specs. So here's my slide deck, just to briefly run through the different capabilities of the two machines. So on the left we've got the Amiga 500 and on the right the X68000. And first of all, you can see they both came out in the same year, in 1987. At least the original version of the X68000, which is what I'm using here as the baseline. CPU wise, well, they're both based on the same processor, the 68000 CPU, but there is a difference here. So the Amiga 500 has a clock speed, depending on whether you're using the PAL or NTSC version, but around 7 megahertz, and it differs between those two because it's all integrated in very closely into the video signal. By contrast, the X68000 uses a sort of cloned chip that runs at 10 megahertz, so it's already running, you know, what, not quite half as fast again. I guess that must be about 40% faster as a CPU. You might have noticed that actually in Xenon 2 that the music seemed to be playing quite rapidly there, and I guess that might be due to the different clock speed of the processors. What have we got next? Well, the Amiga as stock came with 0.5 MB of RAM in 1987. The X68000 had 1 MB and a further megabyte of video RAM, sort of the equivalent of chip RAM, I guess. Bearing in mind that the Super HD model we were just looking at actually has 2 MB on board. That was one of the improvements that were made to the X68000 over time. But then you might say, oh well, the Amiga 500's got all its custom chips, Agnes, Denise, Paula, all the rest of it, so surely that puts the Amiga at an advantage. But you look at the X68000 and it also has its own custom chips, Cynthia, Kathy even, and Vips, etc. Why so? Why did Sharp invent all these different custom chips? Well, the point is the X68000 was designed to be an arcade machine for the consumer. So it had to have arcade style capabilities crammed into that case that we saw to be able to deliver arcade games. And indeed, Capcom used the X68000 as its development machine for its arcade games. That's a measure of how powerful the X68000 actually is. We'll look at a bit of a head-to-head of some games in a minute just to see whether it really paid off. But the sum total of all of that is, well, the X68000 has got its own custom chips to deliver the arcade-style experience just as much as the Amiga does, which also was designed at the outset to be a gaming console. So what have we got next? Well, screen resolution. So back with our Amiga there, we can go up to, with OCS, or up to 640 by 5112 pixels in 16 colours before we start overscanning. That's about the limit of it. The X68000, 512 by 512 in 64,000 colours, or 1000 odd by 1000 in 64 colours. So actually X68000 wins on that count as well. Not looking so good for the Amiga here, is it? The X68000 actually on these specs is looking just as strong, if not stronger. What about sprites? Come on, that's one of the things that the Amiga has got some strength in. Well, the Amiga, before you start playing with sort of techniques like custom copper lists and reusing sprites, etc., you can have 4 per any scan line of the display and have them 16 pixels wide by any number of pixels long in 16 colours if you pair up the sprites. But what can the X68000 manage? Well, again, here it's showing its arcade heritage, 32 sprites per scan line at 16 by 16 pixels in 16 colours. So okay, X68000 sprites can't have unlimited height, but I can have a lot more of them on any given scan line before I start playing tricks. What about sound? Again, but strong point for the A500 was the 4-channel sound. All those samples, in fact, that feature quite a lot in Xenon 2, for example, are as a result of Paula and its sound capabilities. So we can got 4-channel pulse code modulation from Paula. The X68000 actually has a built-in FM synthesizer with 8 channels and can also manage pulse code modulation on the side as well. So different technology behind the sound and music capabilities, but the X68000 don't think really loses any ground on that comparison as well. So yeah, it's all looking a bit bleak for the Amiga. How is the X68000 so much more capable, and you know, what would have happened if it had been available outside Japan. Well, then I think we get to the crunch point, which is price. When it was first released, the A500 was retailed for $700, and the A2000, which has the same specs in essence, for $1,500, which seemed, you know, really expensive by today's eyes, but those were the prices at launch. What about the X68000? Well, that retailed for 369,000 yen, but if you convert that to dollars at the exchange rate at the time, that was $2,500 for that machine. That is the gotcha in this comparison. You get an awful lot for your money, but you also pay an awful lot of money. That's what, almost 4 times as expensive as an A500, and almost twice as much as an A2000. These were expensive machines by the day, the standards of the day when they came out. You know, very impressive specs on paper, but wow, did they cost a lot. You know, so you can always speculate about what might have been in history, but you know, what might have happened if the X68000 had been released in Europe or the US? Well, difficult to know, isn't it? And you might all have your views, but I would have thought at that price point, although it has on paper really fantastic specifications, I think it might have struggled against the Amiga, against the Atari ST, those kinds of machines that were out at the time, perhaps arguably less capable, but a lot more affordable to US and I would say certainly European wallets back in 1987. But that's all very interesting looking at the specs on paper, but what does it really mean for games themselves? We're going to look at that in a minute, but you know, that's the question. Does the extra hardware that the X68000 has on offer result in games that are closer to the arcade originals and look better, sound better, play better? That's the question. Would all that extra expense on the X68000 really result in a better gaming experience? Let's check that out. Alright, well here we are back again with Xenon 2. So this is X68000 playing here. I'll just let this run for a bit, but you know, visually that looks pretty close to the original Amiga version. We have the little trilobite things. Okay, so pretty close to the Amiga version, but what really does the Amiga version look like? Well, through the power of monitor switching, I can just flick the button on the monitor switcher down here, and here is Xenon 2 for the Amiga playing on the A3000 via WHD load. So we're at a similar stage in the game. Let me carry on for a bit. What do we notice? Well, the screen's a bit wider, isn't it? That's one thing. And that sort of makes the X68000 version feel a bit more intense, I think, because it's sort of a little bit squeezed horizontally. The other thing, and the music's playing a bit quietly at the moment, so you might not be able to hear it, is the music's a lot slower on the Amiga version, much more sort of normal pace, I would say. The X68000 music seems to be playing sort of frantic pace, which again adds to this sort of feeling of it being a harder game on the X68000. But otherwise, you know, I'm just picking on a few details right at the margins. These two games are very similar to each other, regardless of which machine you're playing it on. I think the X68000 version is just an amazing job of matching what the original Amiga version feels like. So in terms of the X68000 camping out on Amiga territory and showing that it can play, you know, a sort of native Amiga game just as well as the original, I think it's shown that it can do that. But let's look at something else. Okay, so we're back on the Amiga, as you can see, and let's run one of my favourite games from, I guess, 30 years ago, maybe more than that, from the arcade, Bubble Bobble. Never quite played this as much as I would like to have done from the arcade, being an impoverished student at the time, but now I've got the chance through WHD load. So let's just check this out on the Amiga first, and then we will see what it's like on the X68000. So I've got little robots attacking me. I have to put them into my bubbles because I'm a bubble blowing dragon for some reason, and they don't last in the bubbles forever, as you can see. I don't know if you are familiar with the arcade version. This is pretty similar to the arcade version, I would say, and has all the sort of features in it, and you know, if I was so minded, I could play through all 100 levels and rescue the princess or whatever it is at the end of it. So, a pretty good rendition from the Amiga, but let's just see what the X68000 is capable of. So, let me switch now to that and we'll get to see. Okay, so here we go with the X68000 version of Bubble Bobble. Let's see how it performs. And I think we could tell from that the way I perform is not very good in this game, but I don't know about you, but this just seems a lot closer to the original than the Amiga was able to produce. I would say this is as close to the arcade game as it's possible to get, albeit, you know, I haven't seen the arcade game for 30 years now, so my memory might be a little bit out of date, but you know, this is pretty sort of indistinguishable, I would say, from the arcade game. Very impressive performance. Now, you might say, I suppose, that the reason the Amiga version doesn't measure up quite as well is actually because of the way it was converted. You know, perhaps with better programmers or more time or whatever, it might have been possible to come up with a better conversion for the Amiga. I guess that's true, but let's look at some other games and see how they shape up. Let's have a look at Final Fight, another arcade game. I'd love to show you Street Fighter 2, by the way, which is an almost pixel perfect conversion for the X68000. The issue with that is you need 4 megabytes of RAM to run it, and I've only got 2, so unfortunately it won't run on my 68000. Oh, so sad. But instead we've got Final Fight here. So let's have a look at that. I think we'll skip all the intro and let's just go straight into the game. So apart from the fact that I'm going to be rubbish at this, Some pretty big sprites there, you know, graphics characters, maybe not sprites, but big background scrolling, etc. Certainly looking like an arcade game. The question is it looking exactly like the arcade game or not? So that's the Amiga version. Guess we might get attacked a little bit more up here. That's Amiga version. What about the X68000 version? Well, here we are just about to start the game, and I think you can see first of all it's a lot more colourful seemingly, and we've got that music playing as well. I don't think we had that in the Amiga version. And just even look at this, a lot more colourful. And sort of the sound also drawing me into the game a lot more, I guess. And I think we can see there how close this is to an arcade game, perhaps not surprisingly, because it is a Capcom conversion. Okay, perhaps let's leave my lack of Street Fight or Final Fight skills behind and look at something else. Well, here we have one of those classics that was released for the X68000 that certainly in the West we know as Castlevania, originally released for the X68000 under the name Akumajo Dracula. Let's give this a go, see what it's like, and then compare it the other way around this time to the Amiga version. And let's skip all the intro stuff and get straight into the game. Okay, so I think you're getting the idea of the game and what it looks like and sounds like on this machine. And we're also getting an idea that I don't exactly know how to play it. Alright, that's probably enough of a flavour of how the X68000 version plays. Shall we have a look at this on the Amiga version? Just see what it's like. Let's get Castlevania on the Amiga going. Thanks to the wonders of WHD load, that won't take us very long. So it's a bit of a different start compared to the X68000 version, isn't it? But yeah, I suppose it doesn't really matter if the game is accurate. So let's get going. And the opening sequence, well, yeah, this is looking really quite different, isn't it? My main character here, a lot smaller, and not really moving very smoothly there either, but also the background's lacking in colour compared to the X68000 version, wouldn't you say? I think so. Yeah, this is not really feeling like the first sequence that we saw in the X68000 version. Definitely less colour here, and I suppose in the opposite direction, these enemies are bigger compared to me than they were on the X68000 version, where they're much the same size, but they seem to be coming at me thick and fast, so the difficulty level is that bit higher on the Amiga version. You know, if in doubt, let's run away. But yeah, this is a rather different game, isn't it? Look at that flicker. I don't know if that's coming across on the feed, but as my character moves around the screen, he's flickering quite a bit. Yeah, really not the same kind of experience at all, is it? The last game I want to show you is called Choren Shah 68K, and as far as I know, it was only available originally on the X68000 machine, and then there was a conversion done for the PC. There isn't an Amiga version, but I want to show you this just because it's an example of a sort of native X68000 game. So this was written in 1995. Let's just put it through its paces just for a little while, just to get a feel for it. And let's have a little bit of auto fire, I think. Perhaps this is giving you a feel for what the game's like. Pretty frantic and very much a feeling like an arcade game. You could quite easily see this being in the arcade somewhere in one of those stand-up cases quite happily. Rather addictive, and to be honest, I'm going to stop there before I carry on all afternoon. Let me just turn the sound down just as I bring this video to a close. What do we take from all of these comparisons that I've been doing, etc.? Well, I think the games that we've looked at any rate, come out a lot better on the X68000 than the Amiga. So if you are after getting as close to the arcade version and the arcade feel as you possibly can, then I think the X68000 has got a huge amount to offer. That does come with some drawbacks though. The X68000 was expensive when it was first introduced. It's difficult to get hold of and therefore expensive right now as well. Amiga's much more readily available and affordable. I think the other thing that the Amiga has got to its advantage is the fact that it is usable for other things than just games. And we've got Workbench and all the software that goes with it. a very large user base, and therefore lots of programs, lots of applications that do many other things than games. So, you know, let's return to the opening question. Is the X68000 an Amiga beta? Well, I will leave it up to you to decide on that one, but from my own perspective, I think it very much depends what you're looking for. Is it arcade authenticity, or is it a machine that can play really good video games but can do other things as well and is a bit more available? I think that's the decision to be made. But for now, let me draw this video to a close. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you enjoyed what you've seen, and I'll be back again in the next video.